Hi there, this is Ash,
And this is Hannah, and guess what you're listening to?
episode 4 of Red, White, and Bi.
You lucky thing.
So today we're going to talk about Biden's continued health crisis, thanks to folks like Jake Tapper finally acknowledging what we all knew, that things were going on upstairs that weren't quite right. Now they're just admitting everything, and that Biden also has what they say is prostate cancer. And according to an oncologist on MSNBC, he's probably had it for quite some time. So, Hannah, first question, what you drinking?
Well, I'm still on a bit of a citrus bend, but we had dinner before this and I had a margarita at the restaurant. So I'm continuing with sort of like a poor man's Paloma. I've got some tequila, lime juice, and lemon seltzer.
And I'm sticking with a rum and coke because I'm boring
You're not boring. You just know what you like.
and I'm allergic to things. Uh, so, the reason that I really want to start with Hannah is because she is a medical lab scientist, and she pointed out some stuff about the prostate cancer screening process that kind of felt like it was running a little contrary to some things we were hearing. So, I thought we could start there.
Right. So we've mentioned this before. I work in clinical labs. That's my job. And over the years, I have done thousands, maybe even like tens of thousands of these tests for people. It's a really simple blood test. It's looking for something called PSA, which stands for prostate specific antigen. And basically, it's like this little signal, this chemical footprint that a prostate puts out into your bloodstream. And when something is amiss, particularly like there's cancer going on, those levels increase markedly. So it's a really simple little blood test. If you go to your doctor once a year for your health insurance, they can do it in the same blood draw as, like your cholesterol and your basic chemistry type tests. So something that I learned about that test today that was new to me was that it's really only recommended for men between 40 and 69. Nice. The reason they don't do it for men who are 70 and older is that as we age, men, I should say, not me, but as men age, their PSA levels in their blood naturally start to increase gradually over time. The risk there is that some clinicians might interpret that as a positive and might put the patient through like a whole biopsy type procedure. And that's really like more risky than it's worth for somebody that age. So before this morning, I didn't realize that they don't normally test patients over 70 once a year for this type of thing. However, something that changes my mind about how soon they might have detected this is that Biden is not just anybody, obviously, but more than just being, ex-vice president, ex-president. He has had prostate surgery in 2019. This is like public information. This isn't anything new. But that tells me that they very likely removed his prostate. There's no real reason to have prostate surgery if you're just like, I don't know, fucking around in there. It's either they're taking it out or not. So if he doesn't have one, he should be getting his prostate levels checked maybe even as often as every 6 months. So the reason a doctor will do that is to make sure they got all the tissue, they got all the cancer, or whatever was the problem in the first place that had them take it out. So they're watched very closely after that. And something as recently as 2019, he would have been monitored regularly for his PSA levels.
So, you have a good point there that maybe it makes sense without the surgery that he wouldn't have been getting regular screenings. But if we can assume that that prostate surgery was removing the prostate,
Because I can't, and hey, I didn't go to med school. And if you're looking for medical information, you're on the wrong podcast. But I would assume, what is the point of going in if you're not taking it out?
yeah, and if the prostate's gone and you're supposed to do regular blood tests, especially for now a sitting president, wouldn't you assume that they'd be watching him closely? And if he was in poor health, you'd be actively treating cancer, which leads me to my next point. It seems as though it's possible that in 2022, during a press conference, Biden admitted he currently had cancer. This is a clip from Newsweek that I saw in 2022. Might not have been from Newsweek at that time, but now that everything is like coming out and even, left-leaning media outlets are reporting on this finally, they bring out this clip, it resurfaces. So we're going to play you that clip right now.
Mother drove us, and rather than us be able to walk. And guess what? The first frost, you know what was happening? You had to put on your windshield wipers to get literally the oil slick off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer.
Oh my God. He just said that he had, present tense, has cancer. And it's 2022?
2022.
So, okay, the guy is 1,000 and senile. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that nothing that he said made sense. So maybe his tense is off. But it is implying at the very least that he has had cancer at some point in his life, which we haven't been told about either way.
So the Jake Tapper book also presented a different point. They're talking about the people who are advising Biden, who are actually working actively within his administration, and how some suggested that maybe he needed a wheelchair because he keeps falling down. But they couldn't do that before the election. So it's all about optics and not really what's best for A, the American people, B, Biden. But Hannah, you pointed something else out.
Well, we all know, sadly, and this is not a joke or anything, we all know that there's a history of brain cancer in the Biden family. Bo was diagnosed and succumbed to it at a young age. I'm not exactly sure how old he was, but it was well before his time. We also know that Joe Biden, Dad Biden, at some point had brain surgery. I believe we looked it up. It was sometime in the 80s.
Yes, 1988.
So supposedly that was for an aneurysm repair, which very well might be the case, but I find the odds of two people in a family having brain issues being totally unrelated seem lower than two people having brain issues and it being from the same source.
And I think something that I wondered about, obviously, I'm not a physician or anything like that. So I thought something, though, that was interesting is that in 2010, Bo had a stroke. And they said that there's often some, there might be a stroke incident prior to a diagnosis of a brain tumor. He passed away in 2015. So 5 years after the initial stroke incident. And with Biden, you could possibly say maybe he's having mini strokes or something like that to cause some of the issues that he's having. You can look at a clip of him in 2016 or before that, and he didn't have a stutter. He was a passionate speaker who didn't have word salad or anything like that. And people tried to blame even the aneurysm surgery for this stutter. That was 1988. That's not related.
And he didn't have these significant issues like immediately following in the 80s, 90s, or even early 2000s. Even in the Obama administration, he was pretty lucid and clear and a good communicator. So I think that it's possible. First of all, it's possible that he's just 1,000 years old and needs a wheelchair. But when you combine like the verbal issues, the communicating issues with the physical issues, this is sounding more and more like a central nervous system problem. So let's tie everything together here. You have a prostate cancer that is unlikely to have started all of a sudden in 2025. You have cognitive issues and mobility issues happening as recently as last year. You have a family history of brain cancer. You have a person admitting that they have cancer. The most likely thing that this points to for me sounds like brain cancer. And it sounds like, a kernel of truth is the best lie to try to sell, right? So,
Yeah, my thought is if back in 2020 on the debate stage, the DNC was fully ready to pick Kamala Harris, and they had no idea what Tulsi Gabbard had planned for her. Attacks her on the debate stage, destroys her being the front runner. Maybe their thought was, let's just pick a guy that we know isn't going to be around very long, hoping he'd die and that Harris would just become the first female president of color.
Well, and I think all the way up until the 11th hour, right? That was sort of the hope. Like, I remember people saying once the decision was made that Biden wasn't going to run again and that it was going to be Kamala instead, and she was going up against Trump, there were Democrats, like, unironically and like with this weird optimism saying Biden should just step down so that Kamala can be the first female and brown female president that we've had, as if that would be some sort of victory for her or women.
Yeah, the idea to me that especially a Democrat would want Harris to be the first female president. It's like you might be the party of identity politics, but can't you find a capable, strong woman to be your symbol of that? If they had any sense, that could have been Tulsi Gabbard.
And, you know, again, always to try to play the other side a little bit here, I voted for Hillary in 2016. Whether or not you like her politics, whether you think she's like sleazy or not, she's sharp and she's in charge of her plans. Whether or not you like them, she's a capable person. And I can't say that about Kamala.
I really felt like Nikki Haley would have been a good Republican choice. And I think she's absolutely capable. When she was the UN ambassador and she basically went in there and like shook things up and basically said, we're not going to take any of your shit anymore. I was like, hell yeah, I like this lady. And I have some friends from the Carolinas who might not have liked her as much as governor. So
Is she from the Carolinas?
yeah, she was governor of South Carolina. She served briefly in the South Carolina House, but I like the fact that she kept a balanced budget in the South Carolina House, and that was her plan for the country because she was an accountant.
A budget for the country? What is this you say?
So, and that brings us kind of to our next story. It's a good segue. Obviously, when it comes to Biden, the truth remains to be seen. I don't know if we'll ever see it because they've decided that we're not worthy of knowing the truth.
And I feel like this comes off maybe a little conspiratorial, a little tinfoil hat, but I think the facts are there that the diagnosis they're telling us is happening could not have happened as recently as this year. At the very least, you're going to tell me that the president of the United States had such poor health care that they didn't catch something from 10 years ago, that he just like slipped through the cracks of the healthcare system? I don't buy that. I think a lie or at least a partial cover up is much more likely.
And to your point, 2019, I think, is the likely time of diagnosis if they went in and did a prostate surgery. And to say now that it's some rapid moving cancer when an oncologist is going to go on MSNBC and say the exact opposite is really insulting to our intelligence.
And guys, if MSNBC is saying it, it's not tinfoil hat.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the other topic that we definitely wanted to talk about was one big, beautiful bill.
Oh, big, beautiful bills. I have known some beautiful bills in my day, and I don't think this is one of them.
But Bill Nye from Love Actually is definitely a big, beautiful bill.
And from the Harry Potter franchise, if that's your thing.
So something that bothers me as a fiscal conservative about this big, beautiful bill is the fact that between 2026 and 2034, the bill will raise the federal deficit by $3.8 trillion. And I'm somebody who thinks we should be balancing the budget. We shouldn't be spending nearly as much as we are. And to give a nod to Carol Roth, the author of You Will Own Nothing and A Great Economic Mind, if we had simply dialed back spending after the quote-unquote COVID emergency was over to pre-COVID levels, we would have a budget surplus right now. But instead, COVID was pretty much used as an excuse to really, really increase federal spending. And right now, on average, we're adding about 1.8 trillion to the deficit each year, but we shouldn't be adding more to this. We are now 36.21 trillion dollars in debt, and that's, I just checked the debt clock, and it's really bad.
And we talked about this last week too. We just lost the United States just lost their perfect credit rating from one of the last like global credit tracker watchdog type agencies. So the world has noticed. It's not like we're just accruing all this debt and we still have global credibility. I think obviously we're still doing well on the global scale. We're still like a global powerhouse, but it's not what it was.
No. And it's funny. I think because of this bill and the reaction to it, the fact that people are paying attention to adding to the deficit, adding to the debt, and I think people are scared. Marsha Blackburn, who I've liked in the past, but who I think did something really stupid today, she's a senator from Tennessee. She basically tweeted out that we're living in the golden age of America. And it's like, Marsha, there's two golden ages in America. One of them was when people did lots of cocaine and voted for Ronald Reagan.
The 80s.
The 80s, the early 90s.
Produced some beautiful podcasters as well.
Exactly. Or back in the early 1900s, before the Federal Reserve started ruining our lives. But neither one of those is right now, Marsha. I don't like that. Don't lie.
I want to go back to the 90s. Do you guys ever like go back and watch a 90s movie and see, the single income household with a family of four and they're living in a sprawling colonial on like 2 acres of land and like a golden retriever and 14 cars in the driveway? Remember thinking that was like achievable?
And that's the thing, it was. People could have a bunch of kids on one income, take care of their whole family, and have enough room in their house to have everybody living comfortably. And now we just give it all to the government and they devalue our currency.
So getting back to this giant 11-pound corn-fed baby bill, do you know like what is maybe a main contributor to this $3.8 trillion that are being spent? Like, what's it going towards? Do we even know?
The claim is that they have to make us competitive again, that probably we're investing in manufacturing, those like infrastructure. Maybe that's the quote again, that who knows what it's going to.
And guys, like Ash is super well informed. If the information is readily available and out there without like tons of like, web sleuthing, she'll know it. I think the fact that you don't know that answer is like really concerning. Like the information's hard to find, it's deeply buried. And if you don't know what it is, all these people who are just like celebrating it and calling it, this tagline, the big beautiful bill, it's like you don't even know what the fuck it entails. Why are we championing something just because somebody told us to?
Well, and here's the issue. They were adding pages to the bill, and the congressmen hadn't gotten to read it yet, and they were told to vote on it. And some of them had a real problem with the fact that they're voting on something and they don't know what's in it. And
What is this in the Senate?
In the House initially.
Okay.
So guys like Tom Massey who voted no. But the thing is, it's like these bills are way too long anyway. They're designed to be filled with pork. They're designed to have like these interns can't even take the time to read them before these votes come down.
They're meant to be confusing and like cumbersome to get through. They're meant to have things like hiding in the back pages, right? I mean, that's the point. It's like a filibuster of a document.
And my thought is, like they introduced like a line item veto for presidents where they could like everything in a bill except for one line. And so they can veto just the one thing so that you're not ruining any progress in a good law being made. Well, my thought is, why are we voting on things that are so long that we can't even determine what we're voting on? shouldn't we be voting on one issue at a time?
Well, I think you just said the quiet thing out loud. Nobody knows what's actually in it. So they're just voting along party lines. And it's just my team is better than your team. And it has nothing to do with what's being actually proposed in the document. It has nothing to do with what's best for the country. It has certainly nothing to do with what's best for you and me as like regular citizens.
It reminds me of what Nancy Pelosi said about the Unaffordable Care Act. And yes, I said that on purpose. She said we have to vote on the bill so we can find out what's in it.
Wow. Guys, we elect these people. They work for us.
Well, they certainly don't, but they're supposed to.
They're supposed to. We're the fucking bosses.
Exactly. So it really bothers me that in a time where we're this far in debt, and it used to be a given that we would balance the budget, and the last time I think was 1996 when we had Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, I think is the last balanced budget we had. We had Paul Ryan, that was his goal. And as soon as he became Speaker of the House, he basically knew it wasn't going to happen, that they would balance the budget anymore. It should be law, which they won't pass, for them to have to balance the budget each year. That should be a given. And that's ridiculous that they keep passing an unbalanced budget that's filled with more and more crap, and we don't know what it is.
And I think the obvious motivation here is there must be so much money to be made with the, clandestine handshakes and I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, quid pro quo, vote for this and I'll vote for you.
There's money to be made for them. They're supposed to be working for us, but they look at us like they're little peons, and it's our money. The government doesn't have money. It's taxpayer dollars, which come directly out of our paychecks. And I feel like people forget that. People think maybe they're just taking from billionaires. It's like, don't you ever look at your own paycheck and see how much, even when you make peanuts, gets taken from you? Because I have had some pretty low paying jobs in my day. And at the same time, I knew that I was paying more of my income out of this $26,000 job I had than Bernie Sanders was paying out of his.
So at least in our state, because I know state taxes factor into this, and I'm doing some quick math on my phone right now, but it's about 35% of our check is snatched away from us before we ever see it. So doing the math on that, we work typically, if you work full time, and I hope you do, we work 40 hours a week. So what we're basically saying to the government is at a 35% tax haircut, 14 hours of my week. So nearly two of the 5 days I work go straight to the government. They're not even mine. So I show up on Monday and Tuesday for indentured servanthood, but they let me keep Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
And Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, he had said that any tax that didn't directly benefit the person paying it was an unfair tax. And I think back to my girl Jewel in 1996, who, said she had an aunt in the song Save Your Soul who got Social Security, but it didn't pay her bills. And it's like, if we can think back, years and years ago, and it wasn't helping the people it was supposedly supposed to help, then it's like the social programs that we're paying into do nothing but really steal from us and line the pockets of politicians. And wouldn't we all of us who are working, be better off if we could just keep more of the income that we earn?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you took the 35% that was stolen from you off the top and you put it into the market, I haven't done the math on that because math is not my specialty, but you would make tons more than the measly little check that is supposedly waiting for you when you turn 67 if the program lasts that long.
And call me crazy, but there was a time when we would look at Democrats as the people who were Keynesian economics folks, they believed that, you got to spend money to make money, that somehow spending would help the economy. And that's what they believed. And people who called themselves conservatives believed that spending less and taxing less, letting people keep money in the economy was best for it. But now we have two parties. This one big, beautiful bill is a Trump bill. And this bill adds to the deficit and spends more than we have. So we have no fiscally responsible party. And it's like, I once in my life voted Libertarian. At that time, I considered myself a Libertarian. But Libertarians don't win elections. They don't even hit like an 8 to 10% threshold. They can't get on a debate stage. And if we're stuck in this two-party system, but both of the parties are going to act elitist, steal from us, and screw us over, what the hell do we do?
It's like your trashy neighbor who owns a boat, a sports car, and a cabin up north, but they're getting foreclosed on because they don't pay their bills. It's hard to watch. It's hard to watch the trashiest people you know running the government with your money. Yeah, it's a really gross feeling. I mean, if you're going to take my money, at least help people, but you can't even do that. You can't even run your own programs. The government, as the joke goes, can't even run a fucking website. Have you ever tried to renew your tabs online? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
I can't even fucking sign in.
It's terrible.
It's terrible. I send it by mail, which is its own story.
And don't even get me started on registration of your vehicle that you own, that if you have to register with the government, which you shouldn't have to do, you should only have to do it once. But they make you pay $90 to $150 for a fucking sticker. That's ridiculous. That's what they're doing.
You got to pay to own the thing and pay taxes on what you bought. Then you got to pay taxes on being able to drive it once a year. And then you have to pay for your license. And then you are taxed, of course, to repair the roads that are never in good repair. And I just sound, like my grandpa at this point.
Well, really, it's like we're taxed more than any country in Europe. We have...
Is that true?
Yes. We're taxed on what we earn. We're taxed on the property we live on. We're taxed when we buy anything. And it all amounts to more taxation than in any country in Europe. And that's something that I've seen Ben Shapiro point out with numerous Democrat commentators who try to act like if we were more like Europe, people would be better taken care of. No, we're the most generous country in the world. But are we more corrupt? Is our bureaucracy even more bloated now than some of these countries that have, a capitalist system that has some socialist programs like Finland or Sweden, who Bernie Sanders will pretend are socialist countries?
And on that note, since we have raised Ash's blood pressure enough, let's move on to something that has very little to do with us and our lives. Ash, let's talk about Harvard.
Harvard. There's always a man from Harvard in the middle of our biggest messes, at least according to the smartest man alive, Thomas Sowell.
So the other day, I believe it was earlier this week, Harvard was abruptly notified by Kristi Noem, the U.S. Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, that their certification or their license to host international students has been revoked. They're demanding a documentation on the students themselves, international students that are enrolled in Harvard, as well as Harvard's vetting process for them. And until they're satisfied, the international students' experience is on hold.
So I'm just going to read a statement as well from Kristi Noem on this particular issue, because obviously there's been a lot of pushback and, people are really up in arms. I've seen videos of kids from Harvard who are affected by this, screaming at cameras and really upset.
As one does in their host country.
Exactly. So this is from Kristi Noem. This administration is holding Harvard accountable for fostering violence, anti-Semitism, and coordinating with the Chinese Communist Party on its campus. It is a privilege, not a right, for universities to enroll students and benefit from their higher tuition payments to help pad their multi-billion-dollar endowments. Harvard had plenty of opportunity to do the right thing. It refused. They have lost their student and exchange visitor program certification as a result of their failure to adhere to the law. Let this serve as a warning to all universities and academic institutions across the country.
Pretty harsh words. While ending on that note, let this serve as a warning to all universities. Would we say, obviously, we've all heard of Harvard in the news and the protests that are going on there, and that it's gotten very messy and controversial. Would we say that that is singular to Harvard? I feel like just even as little as a few months ago, we were talking about Columbia in the same light.
Yes, definitely. I do wonder what is behind this. Like, obviously, that statement suggests a few things, but it's like, what pieces of evidence are they seeing that have not been made public that are having them target Harvard specifically? It seems like that might remain to be seen.
Or are there any hidden pieces of
Right.
evidence, or is this prejudicial, as a lot of people are claiming? I will say, when I first heard this story, I was a little confused. I really believe in the rights of like private organizations to, a private owner of a business has a right to refuse business to anybody for any reason. We all have the right to free speech. We all have the right to live in the way that seems best to us. However, I realize that Harvard accepts government funds and that makes them subject to government rules. Just like my own experience working in healthcare, just because something may be acceptable in one state, it has to be federally acceptable by your employer because your employer accepts federal funds. So that adds a whole nother layer of accountability when you're accepting money from Uncle Sam. That being said, how much money do you feel like Harvard really needs from Uncle Sam? I was reading that average tuition just for the 2025 to 2026 school year at Harvard is just under $60,000, which was 2 years of my college when I was back in the day. And then you add in things like room and board and meal plans and all that sort of thing. It can be around something to the tune of $87,000 for 1 year of Harvard.
Yeah, and Hannah has a good point that they accept public grants for research mostly. However, both Hannah and Christy Nome are onto something too. Harvard has an endowment fund that a lot of these universities have and they don't touch, that is filled right now with $53 billion. And
Explain to me, what is an endowment and how do I get one?
well, typically it's like, if they get donations from alumni, from people who like the university,
Private sources.
exactly, or if they, they don't spend what they're bringing in tuition, or if you have public funds that you didn't use on said projects, it all goes into this endowment fund. And the issue that I am failing to understand here is, wouldn't it solve all of Harvard's problems as a private university to cut ties with government, dip into that endowment fund for any research projects, which, if you did research because you're Harvard and your research projects worked out, isn't it possible that you might profit from your discoveries?
I think if there's a university that could do it in the United States, certainly Harvard is in the front of the running for something like that. They have so much clout. They have such an enormous reputation. They're globally known, and obviously, just like we're talking about, students from all over the globe want an education from Harvard. It's extremely prestigious, carries a lot of weight if you have a Harvard-backed study. I don't think there could be a better time for Harvard to go private.
I agree with that. And I will say, too, that I think, even though it's a complete sidebar, that these endowment funds might be the answer to the student debt crisis that both universities and the government help create. That if people are complaining that they got a useless degree, perhaps anybody in that concentration that didn't get the benefit of the education that they were promised could file a little class action lawsuit where they have to dip into these endowment funds and pay back these kids who studied feminist dance theory because maybe that shouldn't have been a major.
Well, and you could even spin it in a little bit more of an optimistic light, too. Let's have some free market competition. How about you say, we'll offer you a degree, and if you don't get a job in your degree, in your field within a year, you're entitled to compensation from our endowment fund. Let's put our money where our mouth is.
Really. And even if it was that you only got a partial refund for
Oh, for
your,
sure.
but it's like something can make this make sense again because, like, really men especially are not enrolling in universities the way that they used to, because it's like, unless you're a doctor, lawyer, engineer, are you really getting the same kind of payout from your quote unquote higher education as people who are going into trade schools and learning a trade?
Yeah, I think that was sort of endemic of our generation. There was this idea that you had to go to college to be successful. It almost, I feel like we were told, our generation, it almost doesn't matter what you get your degree in. Go ahead and pursue something you're passionate about. It'll pay out because you have that piece of paper. And obviously, this is news to no one. That's not the case.
I saw one other piece of this story that I found interesting, wherein CBS was trying to make this huge deal about how the Princess of Belgium was going to be affected negatively by what this administration tried to do with pulling this certification.
She's a student, I take it?
She, at the very least, was admitted.
Okay.
And, this could jeopardize her whole future. Two things. Does the Princess of Belgium really need to go to Harvard, being that she's the Princess of Belgium? And secondly, Hannah, I thought you were the Princess of Belgium.
I am a buffalo and proud of it. Thank you very much. However, I did not go to Harvard, and I am not jeopardized by this decision. That being said, so obviously there was like uproarious feedback from this. People are not happy. And actually, Harvard immediately filed a lawsuit, and the injunction has been temporarily blocked. So May 29th, which is coming up next week, we get our hearing and we get to see how this is going to progress or not progress. Do you feel like this is a constitutional move?
I feel like a private university should be fighting for its right to do whatever it wants. I feel like it is the departments, do departments have rights? They're agencies that are created by the federal government. They might be able to look at each individual student who, is visiting Harvard and, decide whether or not that person has a right to be here. But even I, who has no love for Harvard, feels like this is a pretty broad stroke. And the more that this administration uses executive orders and just tries to, do all of these like intimidation big government things, it's definitely not what I voted for.
And I don't think a lot of Republicans, if I can be so bold as to speak for them, this is not a very Republican action. Like you're saying, these bully tactics, these big sweeping executive orders. Since when is that a Republican value? I thought people wanted small government. I thought that's what conservative meant. You're conserving governmental power. You're trying to keep the government small and in its lane and only acting on appropriate things. We did talk about that. This is a institution that accepts government funds, so it has to play by government rules. But something that Harvard has put out there is that they're not unique in their situation right now. They're being singled out from a sea of people who are acting similarly.
I think another good example of that, if I could change gears slightly, is the fact that Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, is being directly threatened by Trump over the way that they manufacture iPhones. And it's kind of interesting. I went back and I looked at the 2016 debate when Trump was first picked to be the nominee. And I remember back then I was watching Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and they were the candidates that I actually gave money because I wanted to stop Trump at that time.
Rip Ash's inbox.
Yeah,
It has never been the same.
Yeah. And essentially, during that debate, there was the whole thing that came up where Donald Trump had mockingly said, Donald Trump's not a conservative. All of these guys on the debate stage, and I think there were 16 of them total, had a concern that Trump wasn't a conservative. And what was he doing running for their party's nomination? And during that debate, Marco Rubio, who's now the Secretary of State, had said that a conservative was fiscally responsible, that he believed in free enterprise and free trade. And I thought, well, son of a bitch, I really, really believe that if you don't believe in free trade, you're not a conservative. And the fact that he's not only somebody who doesn't believe in free trade and wants to manipulate markets, the fact that he's directly threatening American companies just makes him a bully. And I hate to throw the F word around, but it's kind of fascist.
It is kind of fascist, not for the reason that liberals think it's fascist, but it is fascist. And I think, there has been a lot of debate about whether or not he's a good businessman. Like, oh, we need a businessman running this country like it's a business. Like, well, he went bankrupt in this year and like whatever. Whether or not he's a good businessman, he is a businessman. And he's running this like a business. And maybe this is boardroom politics speaking here. Like, hey, I have more power over you. I'm going to dictate where you can manufacture. Maybe that works in the business world. I don't know. I work in science. However, you're the president of the United States. You're not allowed to run this like a boardroom as much as you might want to, and as much as there might be an application for that in some aspects of government. You are still part of a republic. You still have to behave in a way that preserves people's constitutional rights.
And I would say that the problem isn't necessarily that Trump is running it like a business, but it's the way that he does business differs from the way somebody else might do business. Like, obviously, even though he's a citizen of this country, he's not a natural born citizen. So Elon Musk couldn't be president. But while he's being pushed out of Doge and out of government right now, he's also posting Milton Friedman video clips about free trade.
Who's Milton Friedman?
A famous economist who pretty much came to his height of popularity in the 1980s. So Milton Friedman would talk about free trade and how basically there was competition that made everybody better. And there was also like a global connectedness and a global cooperation that made people more peaceful, work together, and basically how free trade makes everything better. So Elon Musk and somebody in Argentina like Javier Milei, they're somebody who might have came over on a visa and went to school here, and they aren't natural born U.S. citizens. But I'd rather have them both in my boardroom or my White House any day. So on that note, we just want to thank you for joining us again. Been great to talk to you.
Yeah, guys, thanks for listening. Like I said last week, we're very new at this. We're getting our feet under us, and there's going to be some growing pains, obviously. But if you are out there and you are listening, thanks, man. We appreciate you.
And be sure to take our poll. Do you support free trade, or do you like Trump tariffs?
We should put a poll up. How much do you think the big baby beautiful bill weighs?
Yeah. Maybe it weighs about 3.8 trillion pounds.
Perhaps. You can take out my joke.